We've done more than 60 episodes of the Loan Officer Team Training Podcast. And one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast is that I get to talk to successful people who are always doing great things in their own work. And even when that's outside of my field, I find applicable ideas or concepts to apply to my own business and my own personal life as well as in yours. I've collected a handful of some of my favorite moments from our previous podcasts. In this episode, Dr. Shad Helmstetter, the leading authority on mastering self-talk in the world, gives us great ideas. Alyson Rixner, who is sharing with us amazing processes. René Rodriguez is the leading authority on leadership and influence. He shares that it's not just about learning, but what we actually go do with that knowledge. Tyler Osby, who shares his habit of not comparing yourself to others, but look back and measure your own progress and how to create a way to be friction-free. I hope you take something from the experts on this podcast and start using it to succeed in what you enjoy. I'd love you to share this episode and comment on what are some of the strategies that you use to stay on track in your own business and in your own life. If you enjoyed this episode, could you do me a favor and please subscribe and then share it with a colleague? I appreciate you listening.
One of my favorite places to kind of bring this all home, one of my favorite places in a hospital is the newborn nursery, the infant nursery. And when we go there, to visit a newborn, we usually stand on one side of a viewing window, and we look through that window. And there on the other side of the glass, in their little bassinets, are these brand new infants, these brand new miracles of life. And they have their entire life in front of them. And when you look into their eyes, if they're awake, their eyes are open. You can almost see them searching to live out that incredible potential that they were born with. The fact is, no one is born to fail. It doesn't make any difference who you were, or where you were, or what your circumstances were. No human being has ever been born to fail. In fact, we're designed to survive. We're designed to thrive. And so what happens is then that the little infants, they get their first programs, probably in the hospital room where there's a television set on in the corner of the room. They get their first programs, and then they go home, and of course then they begin to grow up, and first they get programs from their parents and family, their brothers and sisters, and then they go to school and they have friends and then teachers, and then they get older, and then television, and today social media and the internet, and imagine all of those sources as programming sources, and imagine that the brain doesn't know the difference between something that's true or false in terms of what it wires in. It just wires in what you get most often. So a good way to look at that is make a comparison. Think right now, and any of your viewers can do this. Think of someone you know, or someone you know of, who you would consider to be the most successful person you can think of. So that doesn't have to be someone you know personally, but they could be alive or not, but someone that you can get a clear picture of in your mind that is truly successful. I don't mean just financially. I mean successful at life. So their life is spiraling up. Their life is working. Mm-hmm. And then get a clear, vivid picture of that person, that successful person in your mind, and then ask that person to come into the room with you right now and just stand off to one side of you. Mm-hmm. And there that person is, completely confident, successful, life is working.
Yes.
And while that person is there, I'd like you to imagine another person. And this one is the opposite. This time, imagine someone who is failing at life, who may be struggling and maybe trying, but life isn't working. When I think of that, I actually still think of this young kid who was 17 years old the last time his parents saw him. If they found him again ever, I suspect he wouldn't even recognize his parents because of the drugs that were in his system. And he'd probably be in an alley someplace. But that's why I think of somebody who is struggling, or worse than struggling, and failing. Mm-hmm. But get your own picture in your mind of someone you can think of that you know or know of who is failing. Doesn't mean they're bad. It means they're failing. Their life isn't working for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then even though they wouldn't want to join us, probably, we're going to ask that person now. Just imagine that person comes in and is also in the room with you and stands over on the other side.
Okay.
So now here you are. On one side is this really wonderful, thriving, successful person. Life is working. And on the other side is the person who is struggling and failing, and life isn't working. And then look at the two of them and ask yourself this question: what's the difference between those two people? What's the difference?
Hmm.
And the answer is their programs.
Yes.
Because it's entirely possible, and this is profound, it's entirely possible that these two people with us right now, one so successful, one failing, it's entirely possible that those same two people could have been the little infants that we were looking at in the newborn nursery just a few minutes ago, and their eyes were wide open and filled with, their whole world was filled with promise and potential. And that was then, and this is now. And the real difference between then and now is the programs they got along the way. That is the story of us. But what's really wonderful about the story of us is that our brain is also designed to rewire itself and change. So self-talk is all about the steps of learning a new language, learning the language of success, learning the language of optimism, learning the language that wires this part of the brain to help us do better in life, as opposed to making this part of the brain stronger that helps us pull back and recede from life.
What a great story. When you think of the potential that little children have and the programming that they get, it's one or the other. So I'm the daughter of a Mexican immigrant. He came to this country not knowing anything of no English at all. He was 18 when he came to America. I ended up being his daughter, born to him when he was in his 30s. But my dad, this is the thing that I always remember. He's the voice in my head because he raised me to believe that I could accomplish anything that I set my mind to, as long as I put the work in and be committed and do it. And he always affirmed me. He was always affirming me and telling me that I could do it. You can do it, Irene. You can do it. And he would encourage me. And my mother did the same thing. But I remember my dad because he was very vocal about it. He was verbal about it. And it was always happening. Now, he wasn't perfect, right? I'm sure I got some programming that wasn't the best as well. But I'm so grateful to my dad for doing that. And I never realized how important that was. Of course, until I got older. You know, the older you get, the more you realize it. But also, when I first walked into the bookstore and found your book, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself, that was the first introduction to your work. And as I was reading it, I realized, that's why that I'm more confident and able to do things that other people wouldn't even try. And I say that in a humble way because it made me more confident to have a father and a mother that affirmed me. But he was very intentional about it. And I talked to a lot of people, Dr. Helmstetter, that did not have that. They did not grow up with affirming programming going through, but it's never too late, is it?
No, it isn't. And I know that when we talk about self-talk and how we program our kids, I know very often parents, I'm one myself, parents will feel really badly that maybe they didn't give their kids all of the right messages. I was fortunate. I was studying self-talk when I had young children in my family. I have two sons. Of course, they're grown now and they're very successful in life. But when they were really young, I decided, what if I couldn't talk to my sons for 30 days? For 1 month, I couldn't say anything out loud. And then I imagined that instead of talking to them, each of them had a little bitty keyboard that was strapped to their little bitty child chest, and that was plugged into their brain. And then I imagined that there was a sign on top of their little keyboard that said, Dad, Mom, everything you type into my computer will be stored for life and acted on as though it's true. Please be careful. I only have one life.
Oh, man.
Well, when I thought that, of course, it made me immediately aware of anything I would say to my kids, because I realized we would never, even if a parent got angry at their child, they would never, if they were thinking about it, type in, "You are stupid," or "You're so clumsy," or "You'll never amount to much," or "You can't do anything," or I can never believe anything you say," or all of the kinds of things that parents say. And I tend to, or have said, and I tend to not be overly critical of parents, because if you think about it, they're just repeating the programs they got from,
Yes.
probably from their parents. And so
Mm-hmm.
they're just repeating those programs. And so I recognize that all of us have an opportunity to break that cycle, both with our families, kids in our families. And of course, we have the opportunity to finally break that cycle with ourselves.
Let's talk about how your process needs to support your business model. So, how do you look at that, Alyson? Share your wisdom with us here.
I love that we're talking about this too, because I don't believe, and I would love to hear your thoughts, that there's a one size fits all process for every business or even every mortgage company. There's a lot of companies out there that have different business models, right?
Mhm.
They have maybe a lot of LOs, or maybe they're in 20 states versus 1 or 2 states.
Yes.
Maybe they have a different kind of philosophy about how they manage pre-approvals, right? Do you quote rates over the phone? There's just all these things that go into who you are and how you want to run your business.
Yes.
And that should be in direct synchronicity with the process that you have and how you set your company up operationally.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a really big believer in that. So I'll give you the example of how we do it. So when I joined Oliver in the business in 2020, and he had been a broker, I think, since 2000 or 2001. So he'd been doing it a really long time. And we decided to work together. And I remember thinking the first conversation we had when we were getting really serious about it was, what do we want this company to be? How do we want to make our mark? What do we believe in? And for us, we believe in doing a lot of upfront work and doing a very accurate pre-approval and application process.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that having the right support team up front, where we estimate about 80% of the work gets done, that process is going to be very different than a company where maybe they don't do a lot of upfront work. They issue a pre-approval, and then kind of the processing team has to fix everything and make everything okay. Different business model. That's not what we do. So I think it's really important to not really even start with your process, but to start with, what do we want to do as a company? We decided we're never issuing a pre-approval to an agent or a client unless we know we can close on that transaction. It's super important to us. So then what do we do? What do we do with our loan partners? What do we do with our qualification questions up front? How does all of that work? So I think that's, generally speaking, kind of what I think when I think about that.
Yeah. So you ask yourself, what do we want? How do we want to run things in our business model? And that doesn't matter whether you're in loans or some other business. You have to know what matters to you and what's important, especially when you're serving clients. How does my voice get heard? How does our voice get heard out in the workforce, in the business world? What do we want to be known for, and how can we make that happen? And I think that's
it.
That's
what
you
you
did.
Just said was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
That was absolutely perfect. What do we want to be known for? And then how do we go execute that?
Yes.
How do we implement that? How do we iterate that to get to a place where we feel like we are standing behind what we're trying to do in the market?
Yes. It's like Simon Sinek says in his book, Start with Why. When I read that book,
I have that here. I still haven't read it.
It just was like you've got to read it. When you read it, your heart is going to feel like mine did. It's just all of a sudden you just go, that's exactly what I want to do. And that's what I did. When we started the Loan Team Training Company,
that's awesome.
I started with why on purpose, because I had read that book and it was my opportunity to start a business for the first time with why. What I love about starting with why is what matters to you. What kind of people do you want to serve? How do you want to serve them? What are your values? Like what really matters to you? And so you're going to love that book. So if the listeners haven't read that book, definitely read that book by Simon Sinek, Start with Why. Now let's discuss why the process is just as much of a reflection on you as the company or on marketing and sales. You know, how does that reflect you as a business owner?
Well, I think it's important to kind of tell you why this is so important to me now. I worked for a lot of corporate companies prior to starting the Orlicki Group with my husband. And I became very disenchanted by a lot of the buzzwords and a lot of the buzz phrases that these companies were saying to clients and really not fulfilling on any of those promises, right? We do X and Y. And then when you actually sign the contract and you get in as a customer, it's a bait and switch.
Yes.
Essentially, right? And making sure that you have that in the process is so important, because you have to know exactly how this business needs to operate in order for you to fulfill what you are telling your clients, agents, vendor partners, your internal team. That is so important. It starts, you know, what do they say? It's an inside job, right?
Yes.
It's an inside job. My team has to know that what we say to a customer on the phone, or what we say on our website, or what we say on social media, that we're actually backing up with the process. So when we tell people that we are going to make sure that you are fully approved to purchase a home, if we don't do that and someone goes out to buy a home and they can't, that's on us.
Yes.
Now, I guess I should say the caveats of them doing something they're really not supposed to do. We're all laughing in the industry, but that goes for any business.
Yeah.
If you're putting your mark and your statement out there, your process has to reflect that.
Yes, it does. So let's talk about how we do that. How do you actually set up a process? And I've watched you do it, and it was an amazing thing to watch how you put it together, and we talked about it. And tell us how you did that. Like, because you started from scratch, there was no process in place.
Well, yes, but I'll never forget this. The first thing that you and I talked about, you said, you got to get this process on paper. And how many years did you try to get Oliver to put his process on paper?
A long time.
It was many years, we'll just say. We won't say the number of years. But I said to him, listen, if we're actually going to do this and we're going to grow this company and scale it and make this a legitimate company, we have to put this down on paper. And
Yes.
I'll never forget, step one was me meeting with him and trying to extract all of the pieces of what was his process over 18 years.
Yep.
Right. Onto a document knowledge system, which we have, which is amazing. But it was a bit of pulling teeth because, and this is another really important thing with the process, if it lives in someone's head, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Right. So I didn't have to create anything from scratch, but I took, over a period of time, I took all of those pieces, kind of pulled them in, and then really evaluated them. So for someone that doesn't have that start that I did, ask around. There's groups, there's a lot of different people that are willing to share their process with you. Get a coach that can help you with your process. That's a fantastic idea. Invest in yourself, invest in your business. But then once you do have it documented, really testing and iterating is very important. The process that we started with when we first put everything into the system is not the process that we have today. It's changed. I think of it as a very organic thing. It's kind of another team member, really, in my mind. And making sure that you take your time with it, but set deadlines for yourself, right? Because if you don't say, okay, we're going to get this on paper by X date, it's probably never going to happen. Push yourself, right?
Yes.
And I had to push myself and I had to push him. Thankfully, I had you there to help me with that because it was definitely interesting. It's so much easier when you actually do it versus thinking about it. Because you can't run a business if you don't have the right operational protocols and SOPs and processes. And, you know, it's just a project like anything else. And again, ask for help where you need it. and know that it is just as important to get that process documented and down in some system as it is to sell and market your company. And if you can't fulfill, again, if you can't execute, it doesn't matter what you say, because people are going to judge you on what you did, not what you said.
Exactly. Tell us, René, about what you do. Let's just start there. What do you do?
What do I do? Well, look at you putting me on the spot. I love it. It would be almost 30 years ago. My mother asked me a question. She said, René, I want you to look in this room and tell me what everybody here has in common. And so I looked in the room and I was looking for facial expressions and, the color of skin and cultural differences. And I couldn't figure it out. And she said, René, everybody in this room has a brain. And if you understand how the brain works, life just becomes easier. And so for me, looking at that passion of saying, okay, so when I went to school for behavioral neuroscience, but I wasn't satisfied with just doing research. I was always curious as to what can I do with it? Like, what do I do with this research? Well, you figured out this about the brain. So what? Who cares? What is the application to the layperson, myself? Maybe I wasn't smart enough to become the researcher, even though I understood it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't where my passion was. I was always the annoying one saying, so what does that mean to selling? I was selling cookware door to door, in college. So I wanted to know, how did that help me become a better salesperson, more persuasive? How did that help me build trust faster? How did that help me resolve conflict? How did it help me talk to girls? What was whatever the application was at the time, I wanted to understand that. And so now 30 years of applying that in countless different business scenarios, I get to help leaders better tell and communicate their message, their story, their vision, help salespeople become more effective, more trusted sales professionals, help build brands, you name it, in the area of influence. That's what we get a chance to do.
That's awesome. What do you love the most about it? Like, what drives you?
To me, it's impact. Easy. It's the ability to have impact on people. When somebody says that was life-changing, my next question is, okay, how specifically? Because I get very excited. Like, what specifically changed? Because it's easy to get emotional about something. We've all gone to workshops where we get excited, adrenaline's high, and we're rah-rahed, and we're seeing these inspirational stories. And the moment we leave, we go back to exactly how we were before. That process always frustrated me. And so for me, the search for impact, lasting impact, really came from my mother. She watched, a culturally Catholic country turn communist in 6 months when she watched Cuba become a communist. She lived and landed in Germany right after the Holocaust and saw cities leveled and the concentration camps. And, so her whole life was very affected by war and change, but so much of change left literal dead bodies in her experience. But I think in today's more modern world, we're leaving dead bodies emotionally. We're leaving dead bodies, not physically, but people, are being lost and left behind. And so how do you make change on a broad scale that doesn't destroy people in the process? And so for me, the ability to have impact, lasting change with people is absolutely my biggest driver.
Yeah. And you do have lasting change because the things that you teach are lasting. It's not just some rah-rah thing that we go to and it doesn't have a lasting effect. So that's a big deal. What's one thing that you do to be intentional about having like a strong mindset and believing that success is not only possible, but also doable? What are some of your habits that you have daily to keep you on that journey?
I think to keep me on that journey, perspective is everything. It's remembering where you came from. Somebody once told me, he said, René, oh, wow, thank you for coming and speaking at our event. I said, thank me? How about thank you? I said, do you know how silly I look on that stage without anybody in the audience? And I said, trust me, most of my career was to an empty audience and a sparse audience. And so remembering that journey always keeps me very grounded in some level of humility to realize that I only exist because the audience says I do. If the audience decides to not like me, if the audience decides to say this isn't valuable anymore, the value to them ceases to exist. And so if you're in a place of influence, if you're a speaker, a leader, a manager, if you're a keynote speaker, whatever it is, you have to remember that you don't own that credibility. They do. And so you are there in service of those people, not as an entertainer, not somebody that owns them or can use them. You are truly there to serve their needs, because the moment you don't, you'll learn really quickly that they can take it all away overnight.
Yep. And it's all about them, isn't it? When you get up there, tell us how you train people. And I know from experience how you do this, but tell the listeners how you get people to understand that it's all about the audience. It's not all about us. Because when we get nervous, we make it all about us, right? We're nervous and that type of thing. So how do you do that?
We get that question a lot, is how do I not become nervous? And then cliche answer is to say, well, it's not about you, it's about the audience. So I said, okay, so what does that mean? Okay. Well, what it means to me is that the audience has choices of how they spend their time. And right now, time is the most precious thing that we have. It's the only thing that we can't get more of. And so for me as a speaker to remember that these people have a choice, I better be immediately valuable. I better be relevant. I better be in service to what their needs are, not to what my agenda is. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't have a strategy from stage. You should, but you can't build that strategy in a vacuum. You have to understand who your audience is, what their needs are, what they're facing, what are they scared of, what are they excited about, what challenges are they facing, what specific issues are going on. Like tomorrow I go speak to 200 orthodontists, and most of the people say, do you know what you're going to talk about? I said, well, I have plenty to talk about, but I want to understand who they are. The more I understand who they are, the better the content then comes together in a more relevant fashion, because it's not about the content, it's about the application of the content that matters. What can they do with it? There's content available everywhere. I can look up anything, but what's relevant to me? What's solving an actual problem? What's offering a solution to a challenge that I'm facing? What's going to help me become better at what my goals are? And if I don't know your goals, then how do I know what to offer you? So I have to spend a lot of time listening and understanding who the audience is and what their needs are.
Okay. I love that. What's one experience that you've had, René, that has, at the time, it was really hard, but it taught you a great lesson?
Oh gosh, most of my life.
I'm really making you think, aren't I?
Yeah. Well, but I think that, the concept of, what's been hard and what shapes us, I think we're shaped during the difficult times. And, I don't believe happiness is the goal in life. I don't believe that at all, because if that's the goal, then I'm going to be miserable most of my life. I'm going to feel like a failure, because most of life is a struggle. Most of life involves some level of suffering. When I say suffering, I don't mean the dramatic sense of suffering. Like, I went to the gym this morning. That was not fun.
Right.
It wasn't fun. I had to fast this morning till about noon. I was hungry. Right. It's not that big of a deal. I know people that fast for, I had to fast for, get a colonoscopy, fast for almost, 36 hours. That sucks, but you do it for your health. You suffer. And, whatever it is, getting up early in the morning, the things that, learning and reading a book, suffering in school, suffering in whatever it is, you suffer for the benefit of something else. You give up the current to build a future. But to me, understanding that suffering and difficult times are okay, that I grow during those times, I become a better person, I become more compassionate, my empathy grows, my ability to connect with most of the world, because most of the world is suffering. And if I can understand that, I connect better with people, and I understand who I am better. I become more appreciative of what's going on, because I have contrast. I understand suffering, and so the good moments come around, they're sweeter. It's like if you give up salt and if you give up sugar, the taste of fruit tastes amazing once you have one. If you haven't had fruit for a month, it's like, wow, this is magical. But if you have it every day, you have sugar, salt, you're desensitized to it. That's what the gift that suffering gives us. It helps us appreciate the things in life. And so to make it through, the mindset is understanding that it's okay to be in difficult times. And it's not supposed to be fun all the time. That doesn't mean you can't search it. But if it's something that has to get done and it's going to be difficult, if my expectation is I got to love it, then I'm not going to do it. So I got to be okay with a little bit of struggle.
Yes.
Actually, a lot of struggle.
It is a lot of struggle. And that's when we learn the most, like you said. Are you holding off on training your loan partners, your loan assistants, your team members, and support staff on how to wow your clients? Are they getting that kind of training from you? You probably plan on training them if you get a few extra hours, but when does that happen realistically? And meanwhile, your team is doing the best they can with the information that they have. But this kind of training really doesn't exist anywhere else. When you do the training, that means you're not as responsive as you want to be with your clients, and you're not hitting your closing and income goals as a loan officer. So how much is it costing you to not have a team that's properly trained how to wow clients and referral partners so that they only want to work with you because of the great experience that they're getting? We teach them how to use efficient step-by-step processes and systems that work, how to follow up so nothing falls through the cracks and loans close on time and even early, how to build wonderful relationships with clients, how to wow people so they go, man, that was an amazing experience. The members of his or her team are amazing. They're so on it. how to use scripts and dialogues for winning clients, setting expectations, and communicating with clients so that you can prevent problems down the road. How to handle difficult clients, how to make clients feel appreciated and valued, and how to handle and overcome objections. It might be time to ask for some help. That's why we're here. Loan Team Training has our next live WOW training coming up. We train your team for you so you can focus on closing loans. Check it out at loanteamtraining.com for our next class and see how many 5-star reviews we have from past WOW training participants and their loan officers who sent them at loanteamtrainingreviews.com. Remember, it's an interactive virtual training with live trainers, and we train any of your support staff that is communicating with clients and referral partners. Our sessions are 9 to 11:30 Pacific time. Check us out and sign your loan partner or team member up at loanteamtraining.com. What I love about you is your mindset, though. You're always working on getting better. And not everybody does that. Some people say they do. You actually do.
Yeah.
And so tell us what you do to help with your mindset and help you reach your goals with the right mindset.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that compliment. I think that for me, I get bored easy. The CEO I work at Fairway Mortgage. CEO of our company uses this term toe tapper or foot tapper. I think it's foot tapper is what I've heard him say. It was a while ago I heard him say that. And I thought, that's what I am. I'm a foot tapper. I can't stand still. I get a little nutty and anxious if I'm just sitting still. And I think that's probably the core reason on why I continue to look for opportunities for growth, whatever that might look like. But I used to have an unhealthy relationship with growth. Actually, this might take a different spin than what you thought it would, but I always just wanted more, more and more and more. And I'd be comparing against other people. There was a coach I had, Dan Sullivan, strategic coach. And he shared this concept of the gap versus the gain, which now there's a very popular book that him and Ben Hardy wrote. But it talks about if you're comparing yourself against someone else or something that's further ahead of you, you're comparing yourself against what he called the ideal. And I don't know if you've ever driven towards this like sunset, right? But as you continue to drive, like you don't get any closer. It just keeps moving further and further away. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes.
And that's similar in my experience to judging against where you want to go. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Going to those Vegas events, there'd be somebody on stage who's doing 30 units a month. Okay. And then, we both leave Vegas and we go back to our offices and we work. And the next year we come back and I've doubled my business. I've gone from 5 units to 10 units a month. And that SOB is up on stage and now he's doing 50 units a month. I'm like, come on, dude. So I could find myself and did find myself for many, many years comparing myself against that ideal who also continues to move further out versus what I had actually accomplished, which is pretty amazing. Going from 5 units a month to 10. So, coaching in many cases, in my experience, is more like a really expensive therapy, but therapy that sometimes I pay more attention to. So what I've found myself trying to make a habit of doing, which hopefully is valuable for anybody, listening to or watching this, is instead of comparing yourself against that ideal that continues to move further and further away, right? Instead, really look backwards and measure your progress, because what I found is when I'm measuring my progress, I just feel so much more full and filled up and excited about the progress that I'm making than I do if I'm constantly chasing, an outside objective, right? So that's been a huge, huge help for me. But also, additionally, I'm always trying to find like the stuff that bugs me. I just don't like to be bothered. And if there's something that I can do that will reduce the bother, I'll do that thing. So, I'm a big like friction-free person. And that's a term I stole from a mentor and now buddy of mine, Dean Jackson. He uses the term friction-free all the time. But I just always look for where's the friction and how can I remove it, whatever the friction might be. And that definitely keeps me growing because, you got to get a little uncomfortable to remove a lot of the friction in life. You got to start thinking outside the box and get curious on what would this look like if I didn't have to deal with whatever the thing is that I'm, talking about.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. Friction free. I don't know if I've ever heard that before, but that's a great term for,
yeah.
I don't like having friction either. Like,
yeah.
I'm always trying to find a better way. It
Mhm.
seems like, you're always trying to find a better way to do something, a more efficient way, an easier way. That's
well,
and that,
and what I think observationally, what I notice is for people who aren't growth oriented folks, when they experience that friction, they let it slow them down or stop them. Personally, and this probably says more about me than it does about them, but personally, it just drives me nuts. Like I get deeply upset about that. Again, it's not really mine to be upset about, but I still let it get that way. So I just don't want to have that happen myself. I'm always trying to kind of push forward. So I don't know. I try to perception check myself though. Like if I'm going more, well, why more? Right? What's important to you about it? But also giving myself permission to still want more. Because another thing that I learned from Strategic Coach, I'll share this. This is a really very impactful thing psychology wise for me. When you have goals or you accomplish a goal, people will wonder why, right? I'll give you an example. About the time we met each other, I had a race car, and people didn't understand it. It was very confusing. Why do you have that car? Doesn't make a lot of sense to them. And it was a goal I'd had for years, Irene. I wanted that car so freaking bad I could taste it. And I worked my butt off to get it, I had to ship money somewhere where they were building it. I mean, it was like this whole thing.
how
And
cool
then
is that?
it was cool. Yeah. But when I got it, I all of a sudden went from like this place of like great pride and excitement that I had this thing that I'd really wanted and worked my ass off for. And then I got it. And everybody that would see me would say, so why'd you get the race car? Right. And I started creating these explanations that were elaborate, like, well, I used to have this other car and the tires were like $2,500 to repair because the car was so heavy. This car, it's lighter and it doesn't abuse tires as bad. I mean, who the hell cares? That's so stupid. That's the most ridiculous. Why would it? There is no economical explanation of why. I just wanted it, right? So the thing that I picked up, and this is a Dan Sullivan thing too, was if someone asks you why, right? Well, why do you want to do 30 loans a month? Because I want to. And then they'll, in my experience, they'll say, yeah, but why? And then I would reply, well, because I want to. And like, that's actually enough, as it turns out, of an explanation. Anything else was just me being insecure about what they were thinking about me,
Yes.
and that's their problem, not my problem. So that was a very meaningful thing that I still do today. And, I will warn you and any listeners that if you start doing this, it will piss some people off. They will be unhappy with that explanation. But as long as it's not like my wife, right? Because sometimes there's a little bit more depth of explanation needed. But if it's just some stranger, like that's their problem. That's not my problem. I can just say it's because I wanted to. And it's a perfect, as long as it's like legal and ethical.
Right.
It's all the more explanation that it needs. So
Yes.
that was like I'm not exaggerating. It was a $30,000 lesson because I remember when I walked into that event, that was what it cost to be a part of the program. And the second I walked out, I was like, yeah, I paid for this whole experience because that was creating enough mental friction for me, where I was just caught up in like these explanations of all the things I wanted. Like, when I met your son, Kenny, in Arizona, it's when I was taking a month off. I would take a month, and I'm in Iowa, so it sucks in the winter. I hate it here in the winter. My wife and I and our daughter at the time, Piper, we only had one at the time. Now we got three. We would go to Arizona for a month. People would ask, well, why? And I would, fabricate these explanations. The weather sucks here, well, yeah, but why? Well, eventually I got to a point where I just say, because I wanted to, and that was enough. It
is enough.
It was perfectly enough. And it was so good. So I don't know, hopefully that's as helpful to some people as it was to me. I paid $30,000 to listen, and now you get it for free. So.
But it was worth it. Definitely worth it.
Worth every penny, man. I mean, every day of my life, it still pays off. If I was still the 20-something version of myself mentally, and how I really cared a lot about what other people thought of my decisions, there'd be so many cool things that I couldn't do right now, because I never would have stepped outside of that area that was comfortable to me, where everybody else felt like it was safe,
Yes.
But also, like, in that time, there's plenty of people who are still very close to me today that were close to me then, and they've all also grown. They're my growth and pursuit of, like, just trying to do things that I think are cool, whatever they are, they're in support of it, and they're, it's just a really healthy way to operate. Are there people who I used to talk to that I don't talk to anymore? Yes. Like, and it's actually just how life works, as it turns out.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes you're a little bit better about making those decisions faster on who deserves to play a role in your life, I guess. I don't know. It probably sounds maybe uncool the way I said that, but
no, not at all.